May 17th meeting of the City Finance Committee. May I have a roll call, please?
Yes, Committee Member Harmon,
Here.
Mayor Rouse.
Here.
Committee Chair Friedman.
Here. We do have a quorum, and we're here. So on to public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to items not on the agenda but under the purview of City Finance? If you do so, please raise your hand in the app. I don't see anybody in the room, so is there anybody online who wishes to speak?
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised at this time.
All right, I'll close public comment and on to item 1, and I'll turn it over to Mr. DeMartini.
Thank you very much, Chair Freeman, members of the committee. My name is Keith DeMartini. I'm the city's finance director, and it is my pleasure to present an overview of the city's third quarter financial review for the current fiscal year 2022. The objective of this presentation is to receive a report from staff on the status of revenues and expenditures through 3 quarters through March 31st of 2022. Accept the fiscal year 2022 interim financial statements for the 9 months ending March 31st, 2022, and also recommend that the full City Council approve of the proposed third quarter adjustments to fiscal year 2022 appropriations and estimated revenues that is detailed in the attachment to the Council agenda report. The agenda for the update for you today is to first receive an update on the general fund. We'll go into some detail on that, and then provide a brief overview of each of the city's major enterprise funds. I will provide a high-level overview of the proposed budget adjustments for the current fiscal year, and then take any questions, public comment, and discussion that you might have. So first, just a recap of the annual review process for our city's financials. We do prepare a monthly financial statement that goes on consent to the City Council at the conclusion of every month. On a quarterly basis, we do make a presentation to the Finance Committee that provides an overview of the actual revenues and expenditures that have been received and incurred for the 3 months prior. And then we also provide a projection of what we, sort of our best estimate of where we think we will end up the fiscal year at each quarterly interval. And where we are with you today in May is an update as of revenues and expenditures through the end of quarter 3. We are scheduled to come back to the Finance Committee in September for the end of quarter 4. And then in December, we will be prepared to present an overview of the annual comprehensive financial report for the year ending June 30th of 2022. This slide shows a high-level overview of our general fund revenues on the left and our general fund expenditures on the right. This is this is for the revised budget. As you can see, a majority of our revenues in the general fund come from the major tax sources, including property tax, sales and use tax, and the Measure C sales tax, as well as TOT. Other revenue mostly accounts for departmental revenues, such as parks and recreation, programming fees, things like that. On the right-hand side, you'll see a pie chart which shows our major general fund expenditures. A majority of our general fund dollars go to fund public safety functions of police and fire, as well as parks and library, and so on and so forth. Now I'll provide an overview of our projection through the end of quarter 3. Again, this is focusing on the general fund to start. As you can see, our revised budget in the general fund is just over $170 million for both revenues and expenditures. Through quarter 3, through 9 months of actual activity, we've received just over $133 million worth of revenue and have incurred $126 million of expenditures. And putting that information together and putting our best projection forward where we think we're going to end up at the end of the year, we're likely to receive just over $180 million of revenue and incur just over $173 million of expenditures. And when you do the math, that does result in a surplus in the general fund of approximately $6.7 million. It's important that I remind the committee members that in order to balance the budget in fiscal year 22, we did direct general fund departments to implement a 5% reduction target. And that equated to approximately $6.8 million of expenditure reductions. And departments presented those proposals to you, and a majority of departments have been holding positions vacant or are achieving other expenditure savings in the departments in order to balance the budget. And so when you account for the expenditure reduction targets, we have effectively balanced the budget to that regard. The upside that we have been experiencing in the general fund is additional sales tax and transient occupancy tax revenues that are coming in much stronger than were originally anticipated post-COVID. It's also important to note that at the end of the fiscal year, per council resolution, 50% of the annual operating surplus does go to fund capital projects. That's a decision that council made many years ago with the adoption of your reserve policy. And that's something that, again, could be revisited in the future. We've talked about that in prior sessions as it relates to our pension management policy. So more to come on that. In summary here, our property taxes, this is a summary of our major general fund revenue sources. Property tax has continued to remain strong through COVID and is projected to do so in the coming years. Sales tax, as I mentioned earlier, has been a little bit stronger than was originally anticipated this fiscal year. Online retail continues to be strong. Our automobile sales, including gasoline sales, continues to be really strong. Inflation is a primary driver for the additional revenue that we do see in sales tax. So that is one sort of benefit that we do realize as a city with inflation. Obviously, we incur additional expense because of that as well, but we do see additional revenue bump because of that. And then also our TOT has remained stronger towards the end of this fiscal year. Not necessarily because of the additional occupancy rates that we've been seeing, but it's primarily due to the average daily rates that tourists are paying when they stay in hotels in Santa Barbara. This table here summarizes those major general fund tax revenue sources. As you can see, TOT in particular is projected to be much stronger. It almost doubled where we are at the end of Q3 this fiscal year compared to last fiscal year when we were in the middle, sort of the heat of the pandemic. But as you can see, sales tax has continued to be much stronger than originally anticipated and compared to last fiscal year as well. Again, just a reminder, we did implement expenditure reduction targets. That was done because of continued decline that we were seeing in revenues at that time. The budget still required the use of reserves, even after implementing $6.8 million of expenditure reduction savings. It still required the city to tap into its reserves by about $1 million in order to balance the budget. This slide here shows the revised budget and the actuals to date for all of the departments that are funded by the general fund. The major takeaway on this slide is that all of the departments are projected to either meet or exceed their expenditure reduction targets. Departments have taken this task very seriously and are projected to do so. To date, we have spent approximately 71% of the total expenditure budget, which is just a little bit light, right? If we were on target for run rate, it would be around 75%. So again, departments have taken this very seriously and are controlling their expenditures as much as possible. There's another effect going on here, which is the city does have a very high vacancy rate. And so we are experiencing additional salary and fringe benefit savings because of the additional vacancy savings caused by that. So now let's talk about the impact on reserves. This table here summarizes the first few lines. What are the target reserves set by council policy, first for the contingency reserves at 10%, and then next at the disaster reserves at 15%. This table here shows a 4-year trend showing 3 years worth of actuals up through fiscal year 21, and then what is being projected in fiscal year 22 based on where we are through Q3. There's good news on this table, which shows that we are projecting to replenish much of the reserves that we have depleted over the past few years, which is a great sign. Again, that's due to the fiscal discipline that we exercised over the past couple of years and really keeping a close eye on that. The implementation of the American Rescue Plan Act funds were also a significant contributing factor to achieving some fiscal stability over the past year, but we still do have our work ahead of us in the upcoming fiscal years, as we've been talking about with council as of late. On the bottom, I do want to point out that there is an adjustment that I've noted here in regards to our self-insurance fund. As the committee is aware, our self-insurance fund is approximately $10 million underfunded compared to where it should be based on our actuarial reports that we receive. And the general fund is responsible for a major share of that. And so it's important to note that the general fund, this line here of around $5.9 million that represents the general fund share of what it is responsible for the self-insurance fund being underfunded. So I feel like that is important for council and the committee to be aware of, and that really does dip into our contingency reserves. This graph here shows approximately like a 17 or 18-year trend of our general fund reserves. This is a slide that we've shown time and time again. It shows that we had to dip into our reserves pretty significantly during the Great Recession, and it took us about 7 years to fully replenish those reserves, chipping away at it year after year. And then come COVID, it showed that we had to dip into it again very significantly. And then we've been able to sort of rebound from there with the additional TOT and sales tax revenue that I talked about earlier, with implementing a number of expenditure reductions now for 3 years in a row. That has helped us to not have to dip into reserves even further. But as you can see in fiscal year 23, we are going to be dipping into reserves again to balance the budget again. So we continue to have our challenges with reserves. So considerations for the end of fiscal year 22 and then thinking beyond. Again, we have a structural deficit in 22. We do again in fiscal year 23. We are requiring the use of reserves in fiscal year 23 as well. We do have additional pressures and considerations on the general fund and really on all other funds as well as it relates to labor negotiations with pension costs and healthcare costs and other MOU costs. Our self-insurance fund, again, is below recommended level. We are scheduled to receive the second tranche of the ARPA funds next week, I'm happy to say, and once they come in, we will work on implementing the number of projects that council has appropriated those funds to be spent on. So that's good news. And we do have projected deficits, though, in fiscal year 23 and beyond that we will continue to grapple with. So now I'll provide a brief overview of the city's enterprise funds. The next two slides show the budget compared to actual revenues and expenditures year to date, and also comparing to what they were year to date at the last fiscal year, so you can see. The only things that are able to highlight here are that for solid waste, water, and wastewater, they are in good fiscal health at this time when considering just their annual operating revenues and operating expenditures. Downtown parking continues to struggle with impacts directly related to COVID, as you can see here. They're projected to run a deficit of just over $744,000 by the end of this current fiscal year. And staff will hear a presentation from them next week in regards to their plans for next fiscal year. This slide here summarizes the same the view of the world for the other major enterprises for clean energy, the airport, golf, and the waterfront fund. It's important to note that clean energy is in its infancy stage, where they're just ramping up, and there'll be a lot of work going on in the next couple of years to work on their reserve policy and to establish what it's going to take to run that enterprise in a fiscally sustainable way. Again, this slide here summarizes the ending projected reserves for each of our major 8 enterprise funds as well. Again, noting downtown parking, the sort of the risk associated with them and their reserves, as well as clean energy. Right now, the clean energy enterprise does not have a city council adopted reserve policy, and that will be something that we'll be bringing back to Finance Committee and then eventually to the city council for their review and consideration, very similar to the other enterprises where we do have reserve policies already established. And then finally, an attachment in our council agenda report before you today are a number of proposed budget adjustments. These are all fairly standard. Many of them are just more technical adjustments that we have to routinely be monitoring to make sure our budget is accurate and reflects the actual revenues and expenditures. This slide here just summarizes those technical budget adjustments that are before you today. In the general fund, they're very minor. There's reserves that are being used for a salary survey. And then I won't go through all of these in detail here, but a number of them are very small and just require being processed so that we can record these revenues and expenditures appropriately. Again, the full details are in attachment 3 of your report before you today. Staff's recommendation is to accept the interim financial statements and then recommend approval to council of the proposed third quarter adjustments to fiscal year 2022 appropriations and estimated revenues as detailed in the attached schedule. And with that, we'll take your questions, public comment, and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for flying through that. Any questions from my colleagues? I just had one question, and it was on slide Sorry about that, I had it marked. Slide 15. Just so I want to understand, it says the structural operating deficit is 8 million. Is that annually or is that projected out to 2025?
Chair Friedman, thank you for that question. The structural operating deficit is 8 million in the current fiscal year, in fiscal year 22. We solved that deficit by requiring departmental expenditure reductions of $6.8 million, and then also just a couple little minor changes there to get to a total of $7 million. And then the remaining 1 million was using reserves. And so again, we've been talking a lot recently about the deficit in the upcoming fiscal year, in fiscal year 23, which is less. But in the current fiscal year, when we produced the city administrator's recommended budget, we had an operating deficit of $8 million. That's correct.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to clarify that, so thank you. Any members of the public wish to speak? I don't see any in the room. Are there any online? If so, please raise your hand in the app.
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised at this time.
Okay, I will close public comment on this, and we do need to vote to accept this, so can I get a motion for the staff recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Committee Member Harmon, second by Committee Member Rouse. All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously, and now we are on to item 2, which is the Finance Committee recommendations fiscal year 2023 budget.
Thank you very much, Chair Freeman. I'm very pleased to be here to present an overview of the Finance Committee's recommendations for the full fiscal year 2023 recommended budget before you today. The agenda for today's presentation is to first review the topics that have already been discussed at prior Finance Committee meetings. We've held 4 Finance Committee meetings to date on the City Administrator's recommended budget for fiscal year 2023. We will then review a few staff recommended adjustments that have already been considered and also are planning to bring before you the full City Council in the coming weeks. We will also take your feedback in regards to your recommendations to the City Administrator's recommended budget. And then we will also just review the remaining scheduled meetings in regards to the budget process, and then take your questions, have public comment, and facilitate any discussion you might have. So first, let's just recap where we've been so far on this current fiscal year budget process for next fiscal year. The first meeting that we had is we had a deep dive into the general fund major revenue sources. And this slide here summarizes those major revenue sources that are being proposed in fiscal year 2023. It includes our sales taxes, property tax, transient occupancy tax, and a summary of other taxes and other revenues. And Ms. Tomaszewski went in detail in each of these general fund taxes and other sources before you. We explained the assumptions that we have been including in developing those projections. We also talked about the major economic indicators that impact a number of those projections, and we're holding by those projections at this time. We do continue to see some upside in sales tax and transient occupancy tax, which I mentioned earlier, which will likely warrant us considering potentially increasing those assumptions as we get a little bit further in the budget process. I am not prepared to do that at this time, but I want to put that out there that we continue to monitor what's going on in the economy to see if it warrants potential adjustments. The next meeting we had with the Finance Committee was we had each general fund department present an overview of the proposed fees that were proposing in the upcoming budget cycle. This slide here summarizes the fees that were being proposed by the Finance Department, Human Resources, the Library, Public Works, the Fire Department, Parks and Recreation, the Police Department, and the Community Development Department. Staff presented some details in regards to those fee changes, and we took your feedback at that time. Last week, we held a meeting very similar to the one prior, where the Enterprise Fund departments presented their proposed fees changes as well, including downtown parking, the airport, solid waste, water and wastewater, golf, and the waterfront. Again, we took your feedback, answered your questions, and here we are today. So, staff doesn't have any specific recommended adjustments at this time from what has already been presented to the Finance Committee, other than our commitment to continue to review the general fund revenues that are coming in to see if it warrants any potential adjustment, which we will continue to do and bring back to you in the coming weeks if we recommend doing so. There will be a number of other technical adjustments to the city administrator's recommended budget that staff are planning, that staff are still working on right now, and we will be summarizing those and be presenting those to you during the June 8th evening meeting, which is your deliberation meeting. And so at that meeting, I will present a very sort of detailed list of all of those recommended adjustments. Again, all of which are more technical in nature with just additional information that staff has been able to review and articulate into what needs to be included in the budget. And then finally, the solid waste department will be proposing to just create one fee for the shopping cart impound fee. You may recall last week they were proposing 2 separate fees. They went back and reviewed it, so they're changing that to just one fee, and that is one staff recommended adjustment that is worth noting. The Finance Committee feedback that we have received to date on the presentations that we've had already. There was a request by Committee Member Harmon to our city attorney in regards to the shopping cart ordinance. Staff has reviewed that, and during tomorrow's budget hearing with the Sustainability and Resilience Department, they will be presenting and addressing those questions tomorrow, so to make sure that that is addressed. And then finally, there was a question by Chair Friedman. You asked questions in regards to outreach that had been conducted for our Spanish-speaking community, particularly in regards to the downtown parking fees. And I did want to inform the committee for what the plan will be for future communications with our Spanish-speaking community. First and foremost, we will have a media release when the adopted budget is issued that will be both translated in Spanish, of course in English. We will make sure that information is distributed on multiple social media platforms. We will also be sending that information to multiple local organizations in Santa Barbara that do direct outreach to the Spanish-speaking community in multiple medias, and so we will make sure that that occurs as well. So let's take a look at the budget calendar that is left before us in the schedule. Today we'll take your final recommendations for the full City Council. Tomorrow we have presentations by the Community Development and Sustainability and Resilience Departments. On Friday we'll be have presentations with the Police Department and the City Attorney's Office. And then next week we'll have the Public Works Department and then our General Fund and Measure C Capital. And then we have our evening deliberation meeting, which is scheduled for Wednesday, June 8th in the evening, where we will go through all of the recommended changes to the City Administrator's recommended budget and then take your direction and the City Council's direction on what should be included or changed. And then on June 14th, at the normal City Council meeting, we'll have the Proposition 218 hearing on the proposed fee increases for utilities. And then we are scheduled to have City Council adopt the budget at the regular City Council meeting on June 21st. So our request to the Finance Committee today is to simply hear a report on the topics that have already been presented to the Finance Committee during the budget process thus far, and then also develop your final recommendations to the full City Council based on your review of the recommended budget. So staff has drafted what the Finance Committee's recommendations can be as a starting place for you this afternoon, and it's shown here if it is proven to be helpful. And that includes accepting the general fund revenue as proposed, and then the general fund fee changes as proposed. We have broken out your recommendations for the enterprise fund fee changes because of a recusal of the chair in regards to the solid waste shopping cart fees, and then also the other staff and other adjustments noted before you today. And with that, we're happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mr. DeMartini. Are there any questions from my colleagues? And so I will open up to public comment. Are there any members of the public online who wish to speak?
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised at this time.
Okay, I think I'll close public comment. So due to item D, I'm going to recuse myself, and then I'll step out for a moment and I'll ask Committee Member Harmon to do the roll call on that. And then when that's done, we'll come back in and do the remainder of the budget. And are there any comments at this point? Okay, I'm going to step out.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. Well, I'll just briefly make a comment. I just want to say how much I appreciate all the work that's gone in from your office, as well as all of the departments that have come together to make this work. Every time we have one of these full budget processes, I just, it's such an undertaking. It really is a feat, and we all learn so much. It's my favorite part of being on Finance Committee. So I wanted to just share my appreciation. I know how much the mayor likes that. So with that, I would move recommendation D, that we recommend to the City Council to approve the solid waste shopping cart fee change as proposed in the recommended fiscal year 2023 budget.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Thanks. Did a great job running the show there. And for the record, I am recusing myself because my employer and source of income may be affected. Okay, so I am also just going to say thank you to all the departments, Mr. DiMartini, for putting it all together. Every department has a big task, and it through the whole year in putting this package together. So I just want to appreciate all the work that everyone does to put in here, and I see many staff in the room. That's a testament to that. So no further comments. Let's go ahead and pass the remainder of this. So is there a motion for the remainder of the staff recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
No opposed, abstentions, passes unanimously. And with that, we are adjourned.
Good job.